everyone, it's Sevi. Genshin's team combat mechanics are largely about making the most of a 4-member team, each with their own set of talents and elements to effectively deal with your opponents. If you're a beginner player that's only beginning to grasp how the combat system works, throwing random bullshit can get you through early game content. Then as you get deeper into the game, you eventually start understanding elemental reactions, buffs, debuffs, artifacts, and skill effects, and so on. You combine certain units that work nicely together, and eventually, you create teams that feel powerful. At some point, you'll realize that you can sequence or arrange your team's abilities in a certain optimal way. This arrangement will utilize many of the mechanics you've picked up to create the most effective and efficient way to deal with your opponents, thereby bringing you closer to maximizing your team's true potential. This sequence of character switching and talent combos is what we refer to as team rotations. In this video, I want to give a quick discussion highlighting the importance of applying team rotations in your combat and how you can practice analyzing rotations on your own. If you're new to my channel, I make a lot of Genshin guides to help players build and play their waifus and husbandos well, so if you want more of that content, clicking that subscribe button would support me a lot. Anyway, let's begin. Rotations mainly involve the following: establishing when and how long characters stay on the field, setting up effects from artifacts, talents, weapons, and reactions, managing talent durations and cooldowns, and generating particles and energy to battery the team. A team rotation takes into account all these so that each member can contribute as much as possible into improving your team's damage output. Let's first use a very simple example to demonstrate the logic of a rotation. This is what a typical rotation table looks like. You can see the characters on the left column and then the notation of their talents. To simplify it, E stands for skill, Q for burst. You can also see in the lowest row more or less how much on-field time each member takes. In the first half, many support utilities are used as setups. In the second half, this is where your damage pays off thanks to your previous member's abilities. It's the case for many team rotations that the biggest DPS window is at the end of the rotation. Let's break down how this particular rotation works. First, Albedo's skill is cast to set up his off-field damage while everyone else is cycling through their talents. Then Zhongli uses his hold skill to generate his shield, which is important for protecting Hu Tao later. Then Xingqiu uses his skill to generate particles and his burst to bring out his buffs and off-field damage, which lasts for 15 seconds at C0. These swords will be procced by Hu Tao during her DPS window. Next, we switch back to Albedo and use his burst. This is because his burst has a passive effect that gives your party 125 EM when it's used for 10 seconds, necessary for buffing Hu Tao's reaction damage. Then switch to Hu Tao and use her skill to enter her pyro damage state and use your preferred attack combos. Thanks to the previous setup of teammates, we know that we can reach the highest damage ceiling of Hu Tao in this team. Optionally, I can use Zhongli's burst to disable enemies after Hu Tao's skill expires. Then, if you generated enough energy for Xingqiu and Albedo, your party should have enough energy to repeat the rotation seamlessly. Otherwise, you might need a few more extra seconds to battery them before restarting the rotation. A minor rearrangement can affect Hu Tao's damage. For instance, if I used Albedo's burst way earlier, his EM buff won't last long enough to buff Hu Tao's DPS window, and it will just be wasted since you're not doing any reaction damage. So consider such details to optimize your rotation. And it's also important to understand how each unit works so you can take advantage of their individual utilities in a team. Know what each unit can do to know how they can do it together well. Let's look at a different table, this time for a freeze team with Ayato, Ayaka, Shenhe, and Kazuha. I'm going to use footage from a previous video to illustrate this more complex rotation. Begin with Shenhe. Use the press skill and burst right away to start reducing cryo resistance and trigger the noblesse set if you have it. Catch the particles to get back some energy. Switch to Kazuha with his skill to crowd control enemies and swirl cryo for the team buff and enemy resistance shred, then use his burst to infuse it with cryo. Switch to Ayato's burst to start applying hydro and freeze enemies. Dash with Ayaka to hit an enemy and get the cryo damage bonus. Then use her skill and burst right after to catch the particles. The enemy should remain frozen as long as Ayato and Ayaka continuously apply Cryo and Hydro. Switch back to Shenhe and reapply the damage buff on Ayaka's burst. Catch the particles to fill up her burst. Then switch to Kazuha and use his skill to crowd control, swirl, and generate particles. Then switch to Ayato now for his skill and generate energy for him. During this time, there's a lack of cryo application, so be mindful of dodging if necessary. Finally, switch to Ayaka and use her skill and catch the particles. She should have nearly all her energy back or completely filled up. Restart the rotation accordingly. As you can see, there are a lot of moving parts in this team compared to the previous rotation example. You'll also notice that 3 characters are able to use their skill twice within the rotation. That's because this team is a more quick swap oriented style, resulting in more instances of switching between different units and inserting their skills. Creating a visual notation of your team's rotation is really helpful for your own reference and for sharing with others. Once you get used to conceptualizing rotations, you'll realize that most rotations last about 20 to 24 seconds. Which makes sense because many burst cooldowns take 20 seconds or so enough time has passed to restart them in the second cycle. Now let's say you want to figure out your favorite team's best rotation. The main things you want to analyze are, first, who's going to take up the most field time if any? How can you ensure that your on-field unit will produce a lot of team damage during their active time? Then, what effects, buffs, or off-field ability setups do you need to put down before your on-field character takes their field time? If this is a quick swap team, then how can you ensure that everyone's cooldowns won't overlap as much as possible so that your talents are used seamlessly one after the other? And how can you ensure that you're generating enough energy for each unit so that their bursts are always ready when needed? A perfect team results in a rotation wherein each second is made good use of. And when you execute such a rotation, it should feel like each character is a puzzle piece that fits perfectly with one another, allowing you to complete the entire picture. For sure, there are certain popular or special teams that creators have made rotation guides of. Complex rotations with a lot to consider are worth an in-depth dedicated guide for. An example of this is the Sukokomon rotation, which is more difficult to master and has a lot of mechanics at work that require such a rotation, yet are very much worth the payoff. But in case you have your own uncommon team of faves that you're trying to optimize, given a little trial and error, I'm sure you can apply these principles on your own. If you'd like, comment below what your main team is and how their rotation goes. I would love to know, and this might also help other players with the same team figure out how to better use them. I hope with this guide, your days of throwing random bullshit can finally be over. But either way, the most important thing to remember is to do what brings you the most fun. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already for more Genshin Impact guides and content, and I will see you all soon. Take care!